How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel. Happy New Year, Happy New Decade, all that good stuff. In this video, I'm going to be talking you through a story that I've been meaning to tell you for quite some time. That is how I learned to drive and how I passed my driving test. It was quite interesting. It wasn't all plain sailing. I thought it would be an interesting story to tell over this clip of me driving my MX-5 with my girlfriend in the passenger seat. I really do apologise for this clip not being as good as some of my other ones. I just have run out of good clips and I can't record in the evenings after work because it's dark, and they didn't get a chance over the weekend to record some onboard footage. Anyway, I hope you enjoy my story. If you do, remember to give it a like, comment as well if you've got your test coming up or if you've got an interesting story about your test. Subscribe for more weekly car content. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So let's start with the build up and lead up to my test. In 2013, I was working at John Lewis in Brent Cross. I was actually working in the women's shoes department, which some of you may have heard in previous videos. I was 17, and despite being an absolute car nut, I was actually late to the game when it came to starting my tests and all that kind of stuff. I'd gotten my provisional license when I was 16 when I could, but I hadn't actually gotten into a car yet. At the time, my dad's runaround was a Peugeot 106 1.1 litre Independence, which he just drove to and from work, and on a Tuesday evening he would drive me from home down to Brent Cross so that I could go do my shift, he'd go do work for a bit and then drive me back home. Because of this, and because he backed himself as a driving instructor for whatever reason, he got me insured on my provisional license on his 106, and basically we would drive it home from work. To begin with, I would drive maybe 2 or 3 miles, but then by the end of my time driving in his car, I would be doing the whole journey home. I'd say this is a really good way to become confident in a car because you're doing it with someone that you trust. I mean, I trust my dad, so I trusted his experience in driving and all that kind of stuff. So when I got in the car and he taught me what to do, I just did it. When I was super comfortable driving the 106, my grandparents very kindly paid for me to have a driving instructor, a guy called Alan, who was actually the same driving instructor for pretty much all of my best mates. And with his help, all of my friends had passed first time, including one of my friends who is particularly bad at driving. Nath, if you're watching this, I'm not sure whether I'm happy that you sold your car and therefore are no longer on the road, or whether I'm just scared for the fact that you're going to come back to driving with very little practice in a couple of years' time. Either way, Alan had a Vauxhall Corsa D from 2012. I believe it was the 1 litre, but it might have been the 1.2. I don't actually remember at this point. But what I do remember is that the first lesson I ever had with him, he collected me from school and I drove us away. I told him that I'd had plenty of experience driving beforehand because I wasn't lying. I had been driving around with my dad, and I think about 2 or 3 minutes into the drive, we stopped at the side of the road and he was like, "Mate, you need to slow down." And I was there like, what, I'm not even going over the speed limit, like what's going on? And he wasn't talking about going fast, he was talking about the fact that I was trying to do everything really quickly, so I was just pushing myself way beyond my means, almost as if I was trying to impress him or something. And he wasn't wrong, I was just trying to prove myself, prove my ability in the car, just trying to do everything way beyond where I was comfortable doing it. And so basically for the rest of that lesson, we spent the whole time just getting comfortable, making sure that I was doing things on my own time and not just rushing into things and going crazy. Alan was an excellent driving instructor and he did a great job of one, slowing me down as I mentioned, but also getting rid of the bad habits that had come as a result of me driving around with my dad for so long. Though my dad did a great job of showing me the ropes, it was Alan that then came in and turned all of that experience of driving into something usable that would pass a test. That includes all the basic stuff like the different maneuvers, the emergency stop, and pretty much everything else about road awareness that you need to know when you're trying to do your driving test. The Corsa as well was a great car to be driving in, a way easier clutch to use, and just everything was nicer than the 106, although what I will mention is that later down the line it did almost screw me up in my test, but we'll get to that in a second. Whilst doing my weekly driving lessons with Alan, I also started revising for my theory test. I'm not sure who, but someone either for my birthday or Christmas bought me the DSA driving standards books to basically run you through everything you'll have in your driving test and in your theory test. So I went all the way through that theory book and answered every single question within the book, and then went through it again and again and again just to fully understand and make sure that I was going to do well in the test. So I was feeling pretty confident about the actual questions part of the theory test, but the hazards perception part really had me worried. You see on loads of forums like Student Room, etc., loads of people saying how they struggle with hazard perception and how they spotted too many or too few hazards and all that kind of stuff, and it was basically just people complaining about that part of the test, and I was really worried going into it. If there's any advice you can give anyone who's about to do their hazard perception test, it's just don't overthink it. Focus, click when you see a hazard, don't overclick, so don't just go mad and start spamming your mouse all the time, and you'll be fine. And sure enough, on the day I was absolutely fine. I only got one question wrong in the actual test part of it, and then it has a perception bit. I got a few more wrong, but ultimately I passed. I then spoke to Alan about my readiness to take the actual test. He said I was absolutely fine to go for it, so I booked it in, and then on the day I was supposed to do an hour-long session with him before the test, just to really get myself warmed up in the car and ready to go, and then it all went a little bit south. Alan is a man who is always on time for stuff, seemingly. He was never once late for me, and we always finished our lessons exactly on time. And yet on the day of the test, he didn't actually show up anywhere near on time. He was about 10 to 15 minutes late, and I was just waiting there outside my school like, oh my gosh, what's going on? He was visibly upset and frustrated, and basically what he told me was that his aunt, who was in the hospice, had just died about an hour previously, and so he'd had to go to the hospice and look after his family, who was obviously mourning this aunt, including himself, and then had to leave the family and his dead aunt to come and take me to my test. I mean, that really can't have been a particularly enjoyable afternoon for Alan. On top of that, he had some more bad news for me. His Corsa's handbrake had broken, so it barely had any handbraking ability whatsoever. Now that's not too much of a big deal in a test. You can drive the car around, put the handbrake on and press the main brake as well, and then it kind of at least feels like you've properly broken when you've come to a halt. However, one time where it doesn't really work very well is when you have to do your hill start in your test, as we'll get onto in a second. So I did my slightly reduced session with Alan in the car, and then we drove straight down to the testing centre where I met my examiner. He seemed like a decent enough bloke. We got straight into it, started doing all the little checks around the car, did the eyesight test, all that good stuff, and then got on the roads and started driving. I was fortunate enough that all of the roads we drove on were roads that I'd driven on before, so it wasn't a big deal. It was all around my own local area. In fact, I drove on my own road on the test as well, which was pretty sick. But I did have in the back of my mind that fear of the handbrake not working on the hill start. Somehow I managed to make it work. We were on this really steep hill, and I was sitting there with the handbrake fully on. We're literally with the handbrake like beyond 90 degrees, it felt like, trying to make sure it had any handbrake at all, and I had the brake on at the same time because the car wouldn't actually stay in place, and I basically had to just pretend to do a handbrake start when in reality just going straight from the brake to the throttle, and the whole thing was very close to a stall. It was not enjoyable, it was not smooth, but I got through that and I didn't actually get any minors for it. I did get minors for two things, however. One was for when I was doing my 3-point turn. I was turning, it was all good, nothing seemingly going wrong, and then a car pulled out from a junction in front of me and I kind of panicked and I stalled the car. Got a minor for that kind of sucked. And then later down the line, I was in a really sketchy bit of road and I had to kind of squeeze around the car, which meant that I had to kind of mount the curb a little bit. So I mounted the curb, he gave me a minor for it. He probably could give me a major for it if he wanted to, but he gave me a minor and that was all good. Other than those few things, the test was actually quite boring. Nothing particularly interesting happened. My strategy was basically just to engage the examiner in conversation for the entire time. He loved it, we had a great chat. I looked around loads and pretended that I was interested in looking at the road, all that good stuff. And then at the end of it, he got out of the car, had a few thoughts about whether he should pass me or not, got back into the car, told me that I was a bit eager, that I needed to slow down, as was said by Alan, but as an overall, he just said to me, great driving, on your way son, you've got yourself a license. Obviously I was gassed, but the weird thing about then obviously getting my driver's license was that I was therefore no longer insured to drive Alan's car. So Alan got into the driver's seat, drove me home, and it was a really weird experience having your driving instructor suddenly drive you around rather than you be doing the driving. Ultimately, I was just happy that I passed my test and that none of my mates were going to rip on me for being the one guy who was a car guy but also failed his test first time. I would actually say there's nothing wrong with failing your test first time, there's no embarrassment in it. The only problem with failing your test first time is the fact that your mates will rip on you. Anyway, a few weeks later my driving license arrived, and this was probably the most annoying part of the whole story. It came, I'll show you a picture of me in my driving license. I was literally 12 years old when that picture was taken. It was my passport photo at the time. It was about to expire and somehow it's still my driving license to today, so I need to get that changed ASAP. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, remember to leave a like as it really helps the channel out. Comment as well to let me know your thoughts. Subscribe for more weekly car content. Huge thank you to my patrons as always for their additional support, but as always thank you very much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.
Listen.